Today we're going to talk about virtual instruments and the virtual wisdom solution, talk a little bit about how we align to the EMC portfolio, which you're obviously hearing a lot about this week. And then, probably most importantly, we're going to have Tony Granata from MetLife come up and talk a little bit about his success implementing virtual wisdom alongside EMC for MetLife. So here live from a customer, real life use cases. So I'll try to spend as little time as possible on the actual marketing, but I do want to make sure everyone's got a level set on the solution, the overview, and so forth. I'm John Gentry. I'm responsible for marketing and alliances at Virtual Instruments. Prior to that, I ran our sales engineering organization. So when we get to the end and we do have Q&A, if you've got a technical question, feel free to ask. We'll try to answer it to the best of our ability. We've got product marketing, product management representation in the room as well. So this is not a huge audience, so we can hopefully make it a little bit more interactive today and have some Q&A and some discussion. I prefer that certainly to a lecture style, as it were, but should have a lot of good content. So what are some of the priorities? I know we hear a lot from EMC in a show like this. I was actually a little surprised when it was just redefine next. I was like, well, I guess Jeremy was like short on ideas because I was expecting some big new theme, but really it is just an evolution or continuation of a lot of the strategies they announced last year, right? The realization of software-defined, the kind of reassimilation of VCE and the convergence solution as core to the EMC portfolio. But when you're looking at, how you're managing overall priorities, convergence, cloud, probably as many different definitions of cloud as there are people in this room, right? What exactly is cloud? When we talk cloud, and I think it's in similar parlance to EMC, it is not what I call the commodity cloud, which would be your Amazon AWS, Azure, the Zero SLA cloud. In fact, I was reading some research recently that said enterprises looking at cloud solutions, the number one actual criteria was not cost, unlike the race to zero articles would have you believe. Anybody wager or guess what it was? The number one criteria when evaluating cloud?
Security.
Risk. But not just security risk, availability and performance risk. Right? If I'm moving it outside my data center, how do I ensure the end user, whether that be a division of my business or an external consumer, actually has a consistent experience, has a highly available, highly performant experience? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then obviously software defined, I use the diamond in the cloud very purposefully. It is the new shiny object that everyone's talking about. I would argue that the first time you stuck an operating system on a controller card and put it in front of a bunch of disks, you had software-defined storage, but that's a whole other argument. In reality, software-defined is how do I move the management plane from the actual data plane? And we would argue that to do that effectively, you need to have a monitoring plane, an auditor on the automator, right? So we'll talk a little bit about what that means from a virtual instruments perspective. How do I ensure what I would call appropriate workload locality? In other words, does the location where I place my workload match the requirements of that workload? Right? And therefore, how do I measure what can go on Converge, what can go to the cloud, what can actually leverage a software-defined strategy to move that data, be it locality or actual tier? I would say all are dependent on performance management. So we've got all the classic EMC solutions, and it is an EMC show. We are VCE certified. We do fit very well. So just quickly, when you're looking at converged, again, how do I know what workload is correct for Flash, as an example? Extreme IO is an extremely fast box. Is it equally fast for all workloads? Not necessarily, right? When I look at a cloud-enabled VMAX solution, right, or I look at vPlex for data center connectivity, right? All of these are product initiatives, but they're not solutions in and of themselves. Right? They all go into a larger strategy for where do I host mission-critical workload in my data center, and how do I evolve with technology while ensuring that I get the appropriate performance and availability for the associated spend. So they just throw Flash everywhere, but that's not necessarily economical, and it's probably not going to service my generic workload as well as it might fit specific things like VDI, as an example. We would argue that the tracking and monitoring of the resources to ensure application and infrastructure are aligned is a critical success factor to deploying any of these solutions. And it's why the old days of just throwing more hardware at the problem are no longer tenable. Right? Growth rates are out of control, costs are out of control. We can't just over-provision our way to performance. We've got to actually look at very specific requirements and how each of these solutions facilitates those requirements. So we argue that, in fact, separation of the control plane from the data plane requires a monitoring plane. Right? That, in fact, the system-wide performance is going to become increasingly more critical than system-wide capacity. Right? Capacity is being commoditized. Moore's law is in full effect. You're hearing about large-scale flash drives pretty soon, right? If you listen to the flash guys, the disk is dead. Well, that may or may not be true, but regardless, understanding what the performance associated with that capacity is going to become more important than the simple capacity question. Right? So starting to go beyond capacity management to capacity and performance management is something that I think Tony will talk about in more depth. It's something that we see our customers adopting a strategy to say, it's not just about satisfying the application requirement for more and more and more, satisfying it for the right kind of more. Right? Old colleague of mine used to say that storage is like oxygen for the application. They have to have it. Right? But what type of storage is becoming increasingly the question. And then where that storage lives, how do you back that up? And what other strategies do you put around that to ensure that it's not just consistently going to the CFO's office asking for a bigger check and a bigger check and a bigger check, or being able to justify what type of check and for what end result. We look at the combined solution. Again, SRM, an important part of that strategy for the capacity management component, not necessarily for the performance management across the end-to-end system. So when we talk about performance, we're talking about much more than array performance or disk performance. We're talking about systemic performance. And when you look at Virtual Wisdom and Viper SRM, actually combining the two can be a very effective strategy. Our sponsor, EMC, is the software group that owns Viper. Right? So there's a lot of marketing messaging out there that sounds very similar. Right? The goal of a conference like this is to sort through the stuff that my colleagues all generate that all sounds the same and figure out what's the right solution for a given task or a given problem. And we would argue that capacity and device management, yes, solutions of the past are very appropriate and fundamentally underpin that requirement. But for pure performance management, you need to look at something that sits a little bit differently, spans across all technologies, all generations, all vendors. How many in the room are just an EMC shop? Really, 100%. So, and one generation or multiple generations. Right? So I think it's from the oldest DMX to the latest VMAX, right? Being able to see across multiple generations and multiple vendors. We would argue that virtual instruments and EMC are better together. So who is Virtual Instruments? For those of you that aren't familiar with VI, we are the leader in infrastructure performance management. We're about 7 years old as a company. We're in our 7th year right now. A little bit unique as an early stage company in that we set out from day one to service the enterprise. So we didn't start out as a mid-market solution looking to kind of grow up into the enterprise. We started out targeting the Global 2000 and mission critical workload. That's been a fairly successful strategy. 38, I think it's now 40 as of last quarter of the Fortune 100 Virtual Instruments customers. But it's unique in that it's not just about the biggest companies. It's about the ones with the most critical dependence on the performance and availability of the underlying infrastructure. And so there's a small hospital out in northern Wisconsin, 100-bed hospital, critically relies on Virtual Instruments to ensure their cerner application is up and running and performing optimally to deliver patient care. Right? Because in healthcare, electronic medical records is mission critical on a level that even the trading app at E-Trade is not mission critical. Right? So who are those customers by vertical market? Pretty spread out. And one of the things that I've learned over the last 6 years, and that I think is a reality of today's marketplace, is there's less and less differentiation between vertical markets in terms of the reliance on technology. It used to be that your banking and finance sectors were your early adopters. They were highly reliant on highly performant systems, insurance vertical. Today, everything relies on mission critical infrastructure. You look at the growth of decision support, and what used to be quarterly planning for a consumer packaged goods company is now real-time big data analytics for those companies reliant on big data warehousing, SAP, right? The grocer is as reliant on infrastructure performance as the trader. And so what we found is that there are commonalities across all of these verticals that can be shared and leveraged throughout them. And one of the things, if you visit us this year down the show floor, is the big transformation we're going through with Virtual Wisdom 4 is to move from collecting a lot of data to actually delivering insights and answers based on that data, based on the experience we've gleaned from working with all of these customers. So that's a big leap forward to say it's not just about data, it's about answers. And it's about learning from all these customers and the diversity of their infrastructures. What are the common trends, common anomalies, common patterns you can recognize to get out in front of emergent issues and get proactive as an organization. When we look at infrastructure performance management specifically, when we talk about infrastructure, it is what everyone's here to talk about, which is that end-to-end compute to storage infrastructure. So we're not talking about application performance management or network performance management, the things that live outside the walls of the data center. This is very specifically hypervisor to LUN. Right? This is very specifically from your VM across physical server, cluster, interconnect, and storage with an emphasis on the I/O. So our heritage as a company is in the storage arena and fiber channel in particular. I mentioned before, we set out to capture mission critical workload in the Global 2000. 90% of it lives on fiber channel attached, AIX physical, or x86 VMware virtualized, or Solaris, or HP, you name it, but it's all out there. We focus on I/O for a couple of reasons. One, tends to be the fastest growing, most expensive, least understood component of that stack. It also happens to be the most impactful on overall performance. So a 10 millisecond slowdown in your I/O equates to a 10-second plus slowdown in the response of the website. Right? Orders of magnitude at every layer of that stack that you move up in terms of the perceived impact of that slowdown. And so if you get back into the core of the data center, what I would argue was post-mainframe, the first cloud, the SAN, first thing to be aggregated, pulled together, and shared back out as a common environment. It's a black box originally. But how to understand how that I/O is affecting overall performance by looking at it from the hypervisor layer, the networking layer, and the storage layer. And to do it not based on capacity measurements, but actual performance. So actually sit on the wire and look at true infrastructure response time. So what is the request response of the actual underlying infrastructure from an I/O perspective? So when you look at the performance tab in most management platforms, what you're going to see is things like frames per second. How many people measure their infrastructure by IOPS? Right? An IOP is not an IOP is not an IOP. An I/O per second is a capacity measurement. It's like trying to figure out how fast you're going by looking at the gas gauge. I'm not going to tell you. Right? Plus, every I/O is not created equal. Right? My IOPS measurement can tell me there's 1,000 cars on the freeway. It can't tell me that there's 200 semis, 15 bugs, 5 smart cars, 16 motorcycles, and a bunch of 4-door sedans. All of which have very different characteristics in how they impact the performance of the overall infrastructure. Right? If I'm trying to pull a bunch of semis on the freeway, it's very different than pulling a bunch of smart cars on the freeway. So we look at every single transaction on the wire in real time to understand true performance and true workload characterization. And then we roll that up and define management specifically as creating the analysis and visualization, the intelligence or the answers to drive actionable results. So we're not talking about device management. We are not a device manager. We're talking about infrastructure management in terms of the insights required to go affect the performance of the system from end to end. The result, and we'll talk a little bit more about this and I won't talk a lot about it, but Tony will, is an evolution, right? Most of our customers progress from availability management to performance management to actual optimization of the infrastructure. So back in 2000, everyone was promising 5 nines. It's been like 15 years of 5 nines. And yet we read about an outage almost weekly. Right? So availability is still a challenge, whether we like it or not. Right? The key is to get out in front of those issues and prevent the business impacting event. To see the trends or anomalies that can be indicative of a pending or potential issue and move from reactive to proactive. We like to say stop troubleshooting, start trouble killing before there's trouble. Right? From there, you can actually get out in front and do true performance management, which is how do I tune the end-to-end system to drive higher levels of utilization and increase performance from the assets I have on the floor. Right? And then how do I ensure as I go acquire more assets, I actually am a more intelligent consumer of that technology because I'm buying the right assets for the workload, which drives ultimately optimization. It's not always cost reduction. Notice we say optimization. It may be that a workload actually requires you to spend more to facilitate the requirement of either a low latency app or not, right? Great customer of ours, E-Trade. We're talking today, actually in a conversation with Tony, about the fact that vPlex would be a great solution for them, except it adds 0.5 milliseconds of latency that they can't tolerate because they're a trading application. So for them, it's more expensive to go direct Extreme I/O with no virtualization, but it's the right solution for the workload, right? So that ultimately is to drive the highest performance at the lowest cost and, probably more importantly, lowest risk, right? Because it's all about risk mitigation. It's about getting out of the war rooms and out in front of the issues and proactively managing the infrastructure to get a better result and have a different conversation with the lines of business, the application owners, and ultimately management overall. So when we say move from reactive to proactive, what do we mean? We mean very specifically saying goodbye to after the fact troubleshooting. How many people have been in a war room in the last 6 months, right? Fun. Not accepting root cause as inferred. How many people have waited indefinitely for level 3 support to come back with RCA? Right? Proactively identify where the impact before there's an impact. I would argue Virtualism 4 gives you the ability to do that through a depth and breadth of metrics previously unavailable, an entity-centric approach so that you define what you're looking at based on the business function it supports, and then ultimately the analytics to give you answers, not just data. So when we look at what does that mean, well, I'll take you through some of the user interfaces. The intelligent topology view that you see here, a very simple description of an entity. An entity is a logical grouping of assets in your infrastructure according to their function. So in this particular case, this is all of the virtual machines, switching fabric, and backend storage supporting an application. And very quickly, I can see the relationships between them. And in this particular case, I can see some trend lines and an alerting that says I've got an issue on this entity. So I can jump straight from a very easy topology view into my case-based alarming to understand, was it an issue? If so, how many times has it occurred? With what frequency? For what duration? So I can start to actually see, is this something that happened during a maintenance window, in which case, not a big deal, it stopped when the maintenance window was over, I can go get my coffee? Or did this never stop, it's been happening every 10 minutes for the last 4 hours, and I gotta run down the hall with my hair on fire and address something, right? Moving from reactive to proactive, these are two of the analytics that I said deliver answers, not data. The event advisor, how many people just have all day to sit back and scour through dashboards looking for interesting stuff? No, not that fun. Event advisor allows you to tell the system, hey, I want to know, is there anything anomalous that's happening out there in my infrastructure that I should be aware of, that's out of norm? And it'll go out and say, I want to look at it from a latency perspective. Show me if there's any spikes or deltas in latency for a given entity. It'll go and scour the data and come back and bring you anomalous events. You could do that for congestion, you could do that for performance, you could do that for overall health. You could do it from a workload perspective. Has there been an uncharacteristic spike in workload that I should be aware of? Event Advisor will bring that back, and you can take that trend and you can drop it into Trend Matcher and say, are there any other corollary and potentially causal trends that are indicative of what caused that anomalous event? And you think about, I'm going to go look for a spike in latency, and then I'm going to say why, and it's going to bring back a spike in workload, or a spike in congestion, or very often, buffer credit starvation, a fun one that's very hard to find, right? That's for the technical folks in the room. But for those of you who've been through a slow draining device and buffer credit starvation, it's not fun and it's very hard to find. We can identify it here in a matter of minutes. Performance-based SLAs. Anyone have performance-based SLAs for their business? How do you measure them?
Pass.
Pass? Yeah. Exactly. I can tell you that the disk seek time is, but oftentimes that's a 5-minute average. Our engineer, VP of Engineering, has a saying, he says there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, of which averages is the worst, right? Because it averages out any anomaly. We actually can provide every transaction in real time on the wire. What that gives us, that you'll see here, this is a great example of the difference. If I've got even a 60-second average of response time from my array, one, I'm missing any fabric-induced latency, I'm missing any host-induced latency, I'm just seeing disk seek time, and I'm seeing a minute. In fiber channel, a minute can represent millions, if not tens of millions of items. Right? Because we're talking about 3 to 5 milliseconds per transaction typically. So I've got an application owner that's screaming at me because it's got slow response time. I go and I look at all of my tooling and it says everything's good. Because what I've got here is a bifurcated workload. I've got some really fast I/O, and I have some really slow I/O. And this one over here that's stemming to 4,500 milliseconds, is waiting 4.5 seconds for an I/O response, he's really unhappy. My tooling tells me that everything's right here, where I actually don't have any workload. But if I average those out into a single minute, I'm going to show something right in the middle. This is the challenge. This is why there is a war room and no one can figure out why. Because everything's based on an average as opposed to actuals. Right? We're going to measure everything and then be able to deliver back an SLA that says, I'll tell you that, in this case, the blue line is the total percentage of my workload responding under that particular time frame. So in this particular case, I could say, if I've got an SLA that says I'm going to do 90% of my workload in under 10 milliseconds, I'm in gross violation of that SLA. And I've got to go performance tune my environment to move all of these transactions down here. Because here's my 90th percentile right here. And that's somewhere around 20 to 50 milliseconds. Right? Likewise, I can then say, well, where did that delay occur? How many people have vplex in the audience? Right? So this is actually a measure of this deltas in latency between host, fabric, and disk. So the ability to actually determine not only am I seeing a spike in latency, but where did it occur? In this particular case, it was the green line. We won't call out who the green line was, because we wouldn't want our friends to get upset. But, needless to say, it'd be very helpful, don't you think, to be able to say in a vplex environment, especially, is it the front end? Is it the vplex? Is it the back end? Where's the delay? Well, vplex looks just like a host in this example, right? Because it's got a virtual initiator, virtual target. So it's spoofing the disk. Right? So the ability to get granular and move beyond just reporting on a device to reporting on the health of the system. And then ultimately characterizing workload. Right? The ability to put all of that together, that histogram on performance that also matches I/O size, and compare the I/O and the performance lines, and then look at the associated spikes or deltas in latency and overall utilization. And come back and say, I can absolutely optimize across all flavors, Vmax, VNX, vplex, extreme I/O. And many of our customers are de-risking and improving the performance of vplex, which you'll hear much more about from Tony. Many of them also using this to vet out extreme I/O for various workloads. Say, where is it most appropriate, and then tune it as a result. So that's enough of the marketing guy. I'm going to invite Tony Granata from MetLife up to give a personal example, and he's much more entertaining than myself. And then I'll come back up at the end to take any questions, and we will facilitate a Q&A.
So I appreciate everybody. I know it's late in the afternoon. We'll try and keep this as engaging as possible. So, as you said, Tony Granata, I'm responsible for global capacity, performance, and monitoring engineering at MetLife. That ranges across the mainframe and distributed platforms. So that's the storage, it's the compute side of the house, and then the whole BMC, alerting platforms, all that kind of stuff. Up until 6 months ago, we didn't have an organization that really focused on the storage platform, right? So we had a whole group that focused on the compute and the memory side of the house, as well as the network and everything like that. But the embedded capacity and performance planning for storage was actually in the engineering team itself. So it was kind of like a side job, so it wasn't really being done. So I'm going to go a little bit at how we came to BI, why we implemented it, and what we're looking to do with it over the next 6 to 12 months, and then 3 to 5 years out. So a little bit about our infrastructure. I'm not going to go through this in a whole lot of detail. This is 1,300 plus applications in our US only data centers. About 3 years ago, we purchased AIG's International Life Insurance Division, and we went from a domestic to a global organization overnight. So we went from 2 data centers to, I think, 96. But this is just focusing on our domestic data centers here in the United States. That 1,300 has probably grown since yesterday because we are doing a part of that global data center consolidation initiative. We're currently taking everything from Mexico through Argentina and migrating it into these 2 data centers. So that application count actually grows daily. Various operating systems, 8,000 server images, again, that's probably a little dated. The vastness of database flavors and the number of instances, because developers like having 13, 14, 23 versions or instances of their databases out there. And then a little bit about the actual storage infrastructure. We are an EMC shop for our distributed SAN, right? We don't have anything else. We've tested other products from other vendors, but we've standardized on the EMC platform. So about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago is when we actually implemented vPlex to actually start getting into the storage virtualization. We started our enterprise SAN infrastructure in 2002. I'm looking at John because John was actually there. And we've actually grown up to now it's a bit over about 10, 15 petabytes, something like that now, and kind of bring it all together. 16 vPlexes, 17 vMax arrays, those numbers go up and down as we go through refreshes and bringing in new hardware and such. So what's the goal of a performance engineering organization in MetLife, right? So up until now, we've been a very reactive organization, right? Application has a problem, customer feels an impact, somebody calls and brings engineering into the conversation. Very reactive, to the point where it was every call we were getting on, we were finding out from a user application development or something like that we've got a problem. And everybody always points to the storage infrastructure because that was the easiest one to blame because we didn't have a team that could say no, right? So there's some of the goals: reduce the number of troubleshooting calls, reduce the number of bottlenecks in the infrastructure. The reason that's important is because we didn't know we had bottlenecks. Without the end-to-end visibility, we didn't know where we were actually starting our applications. So one of the goals of this group is to reduce that. Going down the list, baselining, understanding what should we be running, what's normal, right? I've heard the latest thing because I'm responsible for monitoring engineering as well as we want behavioral-based monitoring, right? So I normally run at this, I now run at this, but I didn't cross that 80% threshold, so I didn't trigger an alert. But why didn't you tell me I went from 34 to 78? Because typically when you get to that 78, it's at 100 in the next minute or so. So we want to be able to baseline our infrastructure and do proactive capacity and performance engineering to make sure we're optimizing our investment in our infrastructure. Right? We spend a lot of money with EMC every year. We need to make sure we're maximizing that investment and really utilizing what we're doing. We want to do optimization, so that proactive detection of abnormal I/O. We have applications and developers that sometimes don't write the most efficient SQL queries out there, right? So when that kind of stuff happens, how do we detect it quickly and efficiently to where we can actually correlate it back to the server that's doing it, right? Right now, it's very hard to do if you don't have something that can see end-to-end in the infrastructure. Early event detection, provide issue correlation. That's actually probably a lot bigger topic that we should talk about is, as John mentioned, root cause analysis. We don't have a high level of efficiency in the recent past of getting to root cause analysis, right? We've got to get to that 90-95 percentile of root cause analysis rather than being somewhere in the mid-60s. Because otherwise we're going to keep having these problems over and over again and we're not really solving what the true issues are. And then the last one there is spending less time getting data. My organization, before we get to the team that was built here, I had a couple of guys that were doing it as sort of side jobs. All they did was mine data and build custom spreadsheets over 3 to 4 days to try and correlate events in the infrastructure instead of actually getting to the problem quickly and making recommendations for remediation. So how are we going to get there, right? So we created a team that is dedicated to storage capacity and performance engineering. A couple of guys are here now. We brought in Shane Klazowski. He's the director of the organization. Brendan Ryan just started with us just a couple of weeks ago. These guys are going to focus on creating a highly optimized and efficient storage platform. Right? It's part of their goals and objectives. They're going to be measured on it because I'm going to be measured on it. And we needed a way to get to a platform that could help us achieve that goal, right? So we also have here with us today Mike Olivio. He's actually with our storage engineering group who partners with these guys to help get us to some of these goals. Proactive performance management and issue detection. Virtual Wisdom 4 is something we're just getting to, as John mentioned. We went and implemented our first installation in last September. And I think Virtual Wisdom 4 was already just coming out. But we wanted the sub 1 millisecond information, right? Because we were feeling the impacts of that normalization of the data and getting the spikes out. So we went with the Virtual Wisdom 3 platform. But you have to know the ones and zeros. It's a lot of information coming out of that platform, right? So we are now on the path of going to Virtual Wisdom 4, where the team and the engineers can actually be consumers of information and make decisions based upon recommendations that come out of the IPM platform, right? Whereas with Virtual Wisdom 3, it's a little more taking the information that's coming out, making the decision, and then changes and see what happens, right? So we'll go into a little bit of a Q-depth setting analysis, and I'll do a correlation on that for you. And then operationalize Virtual Wisdom. GTO is our Global Technology and Operations Organization. We are embedding this in the DNA of our organization, right? So it's going to be in the engineering hands in our group. It's going to be in operations. And it's also going to be in the application development world, right? Because we have the ability to do custom application dashboards with this platform. So either an application development or in our organization, production management, who support the applications running in production, can actually have custom dashboards so they can see themselves if they're experiencing IO latency. Because right now, when there's a problem with the application, the first thing they do is call Shane. My application's slow, what's wrong with the network? Haven't looked at anything, there's no information for them to go on. Now, we'll be able to get to a way that we can create custom dashboards that they can go look for themselves and see if they're experiencing any IO latency in their applications. We're not a trading company, but we have applications that are designed and built in such ways that if the application sees sub 2 millisecond response times, the customer on the website feels the impact. So we're not a trading application, but we do have some pretty complex and sensitive applications that we want to use virtual instruments for. So what are the keys to success? We needed to see real-time performance information. Some of the tools that we actually had in place was historical data, so you kind of had to look back, or we used Unisphere. But with Unisphere, you had to be looking at the glass to see what was going on. So if something goes bump in the night and somebody's not watching that glass, we were running into some of those problems. We want a holistic view of the infrastructure. We want to make sure that we have comprehensive troubleshooting tool sets. So we don't want to have to use 5, 6, 7 different tools to be able to correlate events, right? We want to make sure we can go to one place that can do the event correlation for us. Anybody doing application performance management or APM in their organizations, right? Same kind of thing, but this is all for our storage infrastructure. We wanted indicators that suggest alternate paths. So in other words, when we find an issue in the infrastructure, what's the best way to remediate it, right? So I give a lot of credit to these 3 guys sitting here. They know the infrastructure, they know the applications, they know the technologies, but they don't sit and look at this stuff every single day, day in and day out, like some of the BI service guys, like Mark Donald and those guys. So we want to be able to have a platform in-house that can actually help us make intelligent decisions so that we can be more efficient and react more quickly to problems in the infrastructure. And then we've got more performance analytics for both the VPlex and the VNX platforms. We have pretty much every flavor except Extreme IO in our infrastructure right now. So something that can look across technologies. And even though we're not looking at other vendors right now, if we had to for whatever reason, we now have a platform that's essentially technology agnostic that we can keep as the core of our organization and not have to change every time we bring in a new technology or a new platform. So what are the benefits to MetLife? Between capacity performance engineering, the actual engineering group itself and operations, we now have the ability to profile applications from a storage perspective. Because even the application developers, as I said, they don't know how it should be running, right? We get folks on the calls and we tell them that they're getting 6 millisecond response time and they lose their minds. I thought below 10 milliseconds was good in this industry. But they don't understand what that actually means. But for years, they've been able to just say, storage is slow. Give me more capacity, right? So now we've got a way to profile applications and start looking at standard deviations from their normal operations. Migration planning. So large infrastructure has a lot of hardware that gets refreshed from time to time. We never really had the ability to look at proper workload placement. right? So the model for migrations in the organization was simply really a round robin. So operations would take the infrastructure that had to be refreshed, and they would just put it on the new hardware and just distribute it across the port groups. And Murphy is like my brother-in-law, not just a friend of mine. All of the data warehouses with the highest I/O all ended up on the same process, on the same systems with the same port groups. So at the end of every month, guess who was having batch problem issues and latency problems? Because all the major data warehouses ended up on the same port groups on the same arrays. But nobody had any idea of what that was going to, how that was going to happen, because we didn't do actual workload placement when we did migrations. From an engineering perspective, it helps with break fix, business continuity planning, tuning of the actual infrastructure. And then from an operations perspective, it basically lets us start making level 1 operations team be more effective when we have an issue. Because literally what happens now, or I shouldn't say now, before virtual instruments, if there's a problem in the SAN infrastructure, the first thing operation does is call level 3 engineering. They do no remediation, they do no detection, they do no investigation, because they have no way of doing it. Right? There was no real platform or tool out there for them to be able to do it. So accomplishments to date. So we kind of went all in, right? You know, virtual instruments is a physically tapping the infrastructure. And I don't know about you guys, but when they first wanted to come in and pull 816 fiber channel ports on all of our mission critical applications, that didn't sit well. They sold it to me as a non-disruptive installation. But if you want to pull all those fiber channel ports, how is that non-disruptive? I was proven wrong through effective planning with guys like Mike Olivio from engineering here, along with the implementation teams from Virtual Instruments and Mainline, who is our reseller. We actually tapped 816 fiber channel links in 4 weekends, following all of our normal change process and procedures. Not one application knew what happened. There wasn't one blip or nothing, to where an application knew that we were unplugging the ports and switching them into their new fiber channel taps. So in 4 weeks, I think we did it, actually I would say 4 weekends, but we actually did it on Saturdays from 8 to 12, right Mike? So it was actually 4 days. We tapped all those fiber channel ports with no implications to the applications. What are we doing now with it? It's currently utilized in issue detection and resolution. We just implemented this in December. So we started in September, and over those 4 weekends with year-end change freezes, we actually finished it just before the end of the year. So now we're only using it in issue detection and resolution today by the engineering teams. But we've now created an operationalization plan that by the end of this year, this will be deployed through operations, through storage engineering, as well as my team, capacity performance engineering, and also alert detection directly into our consoles. So BMC, our HV Impact Manager, we're working to take the alerts and send them directly to the consoles and the operations centers. There's tons of areas of opportunities. So between proactively identifying the conditions, performance baselining, detection of abnormal I/O workloads, it's really becoming endless, because every day we're finding new ways to use this platform as part of our organization, right? When you actually think about putting in the hands the information to application development to see what they're doing from a storage perspective, that could get scary to some organizations, because it's kind of like pulling back the covers of your own mess sometimes. But we're looking at it as an opportunity to be able to fix the infrastructure we have today, to be able to give them a self-service portal to be able to see their information and how their applications are working. Right? So we're looking at it as an opportunity rather than as a real negative. So I'm not going to go through this. This is the actual vPlex deployment. As I said, everything that was in front of our vPlexes we tapped. The reason we did everything was, as I said before, I'm related to Murphy, so if we only tapped one vPlex or all the vPlexes and not the data warehouse arrays, inevitably the problem would be where we didn't have the taps. So we made, as an organization, the decision that we're going to go all in and tap the entire infrastructure. So between the VMware software probes and the physical taps, we now have everything and the ability to see everywhere in the infrastructure. We have our standalone data warehouse arrays. The reason they're standalone is because of some SRDF requirements that we still have for some old data warehouses. Obviously, the plan is to eventually get everything behind the Maplexes at some point, but right now this is what our standalone data warehouse array infrastructure looks like. These are all VMAXs. I don't even know how much storage we have across this platform. A couple petabytes now on this one. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of issues and use cases of how we actually have used this platform in the first few months that we've had it. So I said we haven't fully operationalized it yet, but we already see value out of it every day. The first one had to do with QDEP settings. So everybody knows the fabulous world of QDEP settings, right? Well, the problem we were having is that our 8 gig infrastructure was hosting servers and VMs and everything that were running on 2 and 4 gig HBAs. But everything was set the same, right? So we were having applications that were having elongated batch trails in the middle of the night, some pretty critical financial applications, who were complaining about their response times. And when we went and actually looked at virtual instruments the second weekend we had it installed, we could actually see their increased latency and their response times during their batch trails. But when we looked at their end-to-end infrastructure from their HBA through the array, it was apparent it wasn't necessarily their path or their workload causing the contention. What it really was a SQL server that had a QDEP setting that was not working well for its 4 gig HBA. But that SQL server never complained. That application didn't have a problem because they were running fine. But they were just requesting so much data with their QDEP setting, they couldn't handle the workload. So what they were doing was causing a bottleneck in the infrastructure that nobody could ever see because we were only ever looking at that one financial application that was complaining, where it was actually a SQL server from enterprise infrastructure, our organization, that was actually causing the problem. But we never had a way to really correlate the event until we installed Virtual Wisdom, right? Because we only ever looked at that financial application. Now we were able to look across the infrastructure at a very specific set and time and see where were some abnormalities from a response time perspective. So we actually detected this in under 2 hours, fixed the problem, and resolved that issue, and actually got to root cause analysis, which was starting to be a first. The next one was kind of interesting because we weren't engaged at first. Because again, there was a series of mission critical applications that were having poor response times. So we had war rooms and people working in different areas looking at their application issues, and nobody could really correlate what the problem was. I think this went on for 3 or 4 days, and they finally called in Shane, because the exit was just Shane was the only one who was a part of the team at the time, working with Virtual Wisdom and the VI folks. As it turned out, that global data center migration I was telling you about, they were doing some large write traffic as part of the migration that people thought, well, we're not affecting anybody else, it's our own infrastructure. So they were doing these data migrations during the middle of the day that were causing all these application issues. And all we had to do with Virtual Wisdom was go back and say, at this point in time, in this day, everybody's complaining that there was slowness. And in 60 minutes, we found the issue, identified the problem, and recommended to change a process in a migration factory as to when they were doing data migrations. 5 days, teams were looking at this, couldn't figure out what the problem was. The last one here is an interesting one. It was another elongated problem where applications were complaining about infrastructure performance. And nobody could figure out what the problem was. So I think this is another one. There was multiple groups working on their individual applications. Nobody really could figure out what's going on. We got VI on the phone, because again, this was 3 weeks after we finished our installation, so we were new to the platform. Mark Donnelly got on and was able to identify immediately that the problem actually resided in a line card in a Brocade switch that hadn't failed yet, but was in the process of failing. So the Brocade software didn't alert on it because the card was fine and hadn't died. Well, we started seeing a large amount of storage discards. Nobody else in the environment, none of our tools that we had could actually see these problems in the infrastructure, but VI picked it up in a matter of minutes and was able to make the recommendation. We called EMC. EMC got Brocade on the phone, replaced that card, all the problems went away. So we were able to actually identify and pinpoint what the problem was and make the recommendation. Back to things like that QDEP setting though, we had to take the VI data, look where the problem was, and then tell operations, change it to this number. Now the problem is, what's the QDEP setting? 0 to 255, so everybody wants to go to 255. We don't know what the real efficient number was, but with Virtual Wisdom 4 and the new analytics engines that are coming out, it's going to profile those workloads for us and now make recommendations as to what those QDEP settings should be based upon the workload. So now we're getting actual recommendations instead of just data out of the platform. So that's something we're looking to get, I think just in the next couple of months, we're going to have that feature set in-house. Right, John? Okay. Yeah.
I'll say yes.
You're saying yes. So that's kind of what I just wanted to kind of go through real quick. I don't think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes. I want to leave some time for questions if there was.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so, a couple of things he hit on. We do have a new analytic coming out later this summer that is the Q solver, which does make a recommendation for the optimal QDEP setting for any given workload. So no more searching Google and finding 14 definitions of what the right QDEP is, and none of which are based on your actual production workload. There's also some very cool analytics like seasonality to affect the trend matcher and event advisor, so you can actually accommodate for changes in workload based on time of day, time of week, time of month, etc. And then you notice on one of those slides there was a large VMware estate for our VM probe that profiles from the hypervisor and virtual machine down to the one. You also saw a big power systems footprint. So probably one of the most requested probes and the one that we'll be talking with these guys about is our power systems probe. So the same hypervisor support for Power VM is coming out in the summer, as well as Hyper-V. So pushing to go multi-hypervisor and then multi-protocol on the back end as well. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I've got a mic. Any questions from the audience?
I have 3 questions.
All right, here.
It's a good thing I brought the technical guys.
The first question is that you integrated VI into your production environment, tabs and probes and all those good stuff. What were the challenges that you had when you tried to integrate it into a true production environment? First question. The second question is that VI puts out a very large amount of valuable data. You have to be smart enough to analyze the data yourself to respond to the data that you get out of VI. Within MetLife, you've got a core team of people who are experienced with VI tools, or are you using VI's professional services to help you to understand the issues? Last but not the least, what are the things that you use for your business case to justify VI's expenses?
Okay. I'll probably forget questions 2 and 3, so you might have to repeat them. So I think the first question is, how do we get buy-in from the organization, essentially? Right? So I did not sell VI into MetLife as a cost-saving tool. I didn't. I sold it as an opportunity to become a proactive organization rather than a reactive. So I didn't sell it as a cost-saving opportunity, so that's not how I did it. What I got, the way we used it in the business case that was built around it was, we can't tell you whether storage is the problem or not with what we had in the house at the time, right? So there was a lot of guessing. And the fact that we were on what we have to call QRM calls, quality review meetings, and time after time after time, the gap was identified as we lack visibility in storage, we're not sure what the response time should be, whatever it is. So we actually used actual problems in the infrastructure for answers we couldn't give to help build most of the business case. But really was, the big factor was becoming a proactive organization rather than a reactive. And then the next step is to get to a predictive organization. To be able to understand, if I move this workload from here to here, what's that going to do to our infrastructure? We didn't have anything in-house that can do it, platform agnostic, which is another big reason that we went with personal insurance.
So are you using VI to provide the service to monitor your environment? You have your own team who are experts now trained to monitor the environment.
So what we did is we built a 6-person organization that's not just using virtual instruments, right? Because they're doing capacity planning and forecasting, supply demand management, right? Understanding the actual growth of the infrastructure, so they're focusing on that. We did bring in professional services for virtual instruments to get it implemented and operationalized. As we're doing that, they're working hand in hand with Shane and Mike and Brennan, and we have a training program as we're going through that so that they can learn. Now, Virtual Wisdom 3, as I said, was very data-centric, so you had to be that ones and zeros kind of guy to really get the depth and breadth that I wanted out of the platform. But now with Virtual Wisdom 4 and the predictive analytics and the analyzer and the Q analyzer that's coming out, they don't have to be as depth with the platform itself. So I've asked, and we had meetings this morning and talked about maybe sort of a managed service where they provide sort of a tier 4 expertise level to make sure that if we have to reach into somebody, we can do that. Because I don't want them every day just staring at dashboards.
So irrespective of what investment you made to bring VI in, what is your return on investment, break-even point?
I didn't sell it, so I didn't do an ROI model because I didn't want to put a dollar savings on it. What I wanted to put on there was the fact that we're going to be a proactive organization. We're going to get to issue detection and resolution. And instead of waiting for somebody to call us and tell us we're having a problem with our application, we're going to call them and say, what did you change in your work or in your application? Because your I/O demand just went from X to Y overnight. So I didn't sell it from a savings perspective. Now, when it comes to refreshing the infrastructure, and we don't need half the brocade fabrics that we have, or we don't need the amount of duplexes that we have, then that's just an actual add-on at the end.
Others?
Have you run any other analyzers, like NetScout or something like that as well?
We've had other analyzers in-house, yep. But it was very with blinders onto that piece, right? So it can't see, yeah, it can't see it in the end. Like I said, you know, the brocade software, what is it? Network visualizer, whatever it is, didn't alert on that line card failure because the card hadn't failed yet. So it only was looking for, is it dead or not? So yes, we do have a bunch of tools. So another benefit of bringing in virtual instruments, to your question, sir, is now we can also look at rationalization of our tool set. No, we're never going to get down to one tool, right? It's not like one ring to rule them all type of thing. But to get rid of some of them, the amount of tools we have now, there's inherent savings just from the maintenance contracts on that software.
Do you see being able to use VI to help identify tiering strategies, percentage of different tiers of storage?
Yep. Absolutely. Right now, everything's tier 1. We have a great tiering strategy, but everything's tier 1. But yes, as we start understanding the application profiles and the workload demand and the I/O, absolutely it'll be used at the core of doing application profile and making sure things live on the appropriate infrastructures.
Just so you know, the version 4 of the Q-Solver works really good.
Yeah? All right.
Do you see this being able to do stuff off the mainframe to servers or servers back to the mainframe?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of it?
Do you see this tool giving you an insight and being able to move the applications from the mainframe, like a server or vice versa?
Going from the x86 platform to mainframe, probably there's nothing for the mainframe yet from virtual instruments. I've asked for it. I think it's been in some of their conversations going forward because we do have a very large mainframe infrastructure. And right now, as I said, we're a large AIX shop, but there's no IBM reps in the room, right? We're making a large migration to the x86 platform. Over the past several years, you see a definite distinction in the growth in the x86 and the decline of the power platforms. So that's really where we're focused on it right now. So I would love to see us adopt more Z-Linux and move more to that platform. It's just a little bit of a cultural thing right now that we're working through.
The one thing I will say though, from other customer experiences, especially in the Z-Linux world, if it's fiber attached, one of the things this can give you is the same level of visibility that the mainframe guys are used to. So convincing them to migrate is actually easier. We have a lot of customers move from direct attached AS400 to power as a first step because they can actually guarantee latencies that they couldn't before, which was the main reason they stayed on dedicated direct attached legacy systems. Or not even systems of record. It's legacy. There's another
I have a question about some experience with HANA or Big HANA.
Not us.
So, depending on the implementation, if it's fiber attached, then you're going to see a significant performance improvement, especially in ingest and egress. That's a massive. HANA implementations.
HANA and also Big HANA, the virtual that is running on top of the.
Yeah, I mean, that's just another application with in that particular case, a very distinct I/O profile, which is high capacity ingress and egress.
So it's, everything is running to be on a fiber channel. For example, if I will add HANA that require NFS and will be over the network.
We do have an NFS probe, and we are launching a performance probe for NAS at the end of this year. But today, our main focus is fiber channel. But we are looking to bring all those capabilities into the IP-based NFS or NAS world. End of this year. Yes, it's in beta right now. July.
We're looking forward to that.
A lot of people. That'll give you all the stats: LPAR to run, VIO, LPAR contention.
Right now, we have to map a lot of that stuff manually once you get to the VIO server. So having that visibility now to go past that VIO server is going to be key for us, especially when we're in this big migration to x86.
Yes.
I think somebody else had my question.
Are you running this in just your production environment, or do you have any lower environments running through?
It's all tap. So we don't, right now,
Environment?
yeah, all of our environments are tap, all the way down through development. Like I said, we have a large, complex infrastructure, as many people do. But MetLife is not a bleeding-edge technology adopter, but we are a very leading-edge technology adopter. We use it to differentiate ourselves in the market space, right? Help enable the business get to customers faster and more efficiently. So our entire AIX platform has been fully virtualized since 2007. Now, with the dramatic increase in x86 workload and the adoption of Linux and the introduction of vPlex, to now we have CPU virtualization and storage virtualization and everything else virtualization. We've got a pretty complex infrastructure, so to just tap the whole thing just seemed to make sense for us to make it a part of our DNA.
That is an increasing, we're seeing, E-Trade's not here, but they were in our suite earlier, and they're moving into dev, because the rise of DevOps and the sort of blurring the lines between development and prod, understanding that workload as it migrates through development to operations is critical. So we're seeing more and more. PayPal's been a customer for 6 years, and they use it to tune, they use virtual wisdom data to tune application development as a part of that whole process. So there's a VI checkoff when they go to release new code. To your point, what did you do to my IO? Right? No, you didn't re-index that table. Great. Any other yes? Well, it's unfortunately in the NAS world, there's not one flavor. So we started with NFS on tap 8. ISOM will be next, although that's not, sorry, there's some issues with the protocol there, we're sorting through. So we'll follow customer. But right now, EMC's ISOM platform is second in line. Now for hardware implementation, when you're on the wire, everything changes. But that's too far out for me to go into details. They take my badge. But if you want to schedule a briefing with VP of Engineering Barry Cook, stop by our booth tomorrow, 2:39. Barry's here all week, and we'd love to get into more depth. And he can actually decide what he can and can't say. But I better not decide for him. Yes?
So this is for John. For your opinion on how long you think most of the storage is going to be run through fiber channel.
Me personally?
Yeah, we see a lot of movement to more with vSANs, commodity.
That was the best marketing I've ever seen. To name a product something that has absolutely no relationship at all. There is no SAN in vSAN. It's specifically not SAN. The tail on technology is long, right? So you have to look at the market space in terms of, I think it's very specific. So if you look at IBC data, which is the whole market, You look at NAS growing, you look at iSCSI growing, largely driven by SMB. You look at 451 data, which is enterprise data, and fiber grew at 3x the rate of any other protocol last year. It was one of the higher growth rates, and still 67% of all disks shipped was fiber channel. So, you know, yes, there's some movement. I think 10 gig is creating capacity overhead to make iSCSI viable, but that goes away pretty quickly, right? When you got a big pipe, all of a sudden you can put a bunch of inefficient traffic over it, and then all of a sudden all that inefficient traffic starts to run into itself, and all of a sudden the pipe's not so big anymore. I mean, I have several customers, they were going to be 100% FCOE 5 years ago. That didn't pan out so well, so 3 years ago they were going to be 100% iSCSI. Now they're like, well, we better get this multi-petabyte fiber channel environment in order. I think, and this would be, I think, the next evolution for a MetLife. I don't understand the desire outside of cost, which if you implement a virtual wisdom, I can pretty much bet you I can make fiber channel less expensive than everything else you're considering. Right? I mean, if the only driver's cost is because you're over-provisioning and over-deploying, it's not because it's inherently more expensive.
Yeah, and I still struggle with why they're, you know, that's why SANs were created in the first place, but the scalability issues with the vSANs. But
Scalability,
it's just, hear a
performance,
lot
reliability.
about it, you know, we're looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, and are we religion aside, are we preparing for it? Absolutely. So you see our foray into NAS, our foray into Ethernet, layer 2, IP, it's coming. Probably from our perspective to support scale out hyperconverged more than anything else, because that's going to be all Ethernet, which is more like a vSAN architecture. The challenge today, there's no central intelligence to any of those architectures. So you're either handing the keys of the kingdom to Nutanix and their code, or kind of hoping on freeware if there's no place to go to understand what's happening in my hyperconverged scale out environment. So again, we live in enterprise class, mission critical compute. Not seeing a lot of that there yet. All right, thank you all very much for coming. Have a great night. Thank you, Tony, very much.